Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Episode 84, The Seleucid Patriarch. Today, as promised last time, we will be exploring the family of Antiochus III. We've had opportunity to introduce his wife and eldest son over the course of our narrative, but so far the rest of the dynasty has been rather lacking. So, let's pause our story to examine the children, and ultimately some grandchildren, of the king. First off, we've seen before that Antiochus III was married to Laodike III. This was the daughter of Mithridates II of Pontus, and hence a cousin of the king. We explored the connections the Pontic royal family had to the rest of the Seleucid story in episode 43, when a Seleucid princess was married off to Mithridates II. Laodike was the granddaughter of Antiochus II through this connection. The marriage between her and Antiochus III came in 222 BCE, about a year after Antiochus became king. With that said, let's turn to the matter of the children. Given the comparative lack of clear information, at least at first, I'm going to first off go through them in the order of appearance on Wikipedia, and then delve into more detail a bit later in the episode. This is because, as per usual, our favourite popular source is relatively silent on the issue of birth dates. With that caveat in mind, let's get into it. The first was their son, Antiochus the young king. He was born in about 221 BCE, and we saw that his birth led to the minister Hermias hoping Antiochus III would die, so Hermias could gain control over an infant Antiochus IV. However, Hermias would never get the chance, as he abruptly fell from grace at the business end of a dagger. Antiochus the young king was enthroned as, well, young king in 210 BCE, when he would have been about 11. We've seen previously that this was in anticipation of Antiochus III going off to war. The Seleucids have, by now, established the tradition that the heir is crowned before a campaign in case the king dies on said campaign. Not that this is always held, but still, it's at least established precedent. The second listed child was a boy, Seleucus, born in about 220 or 218 BCE. I'm sure that 2 sons in potentially as many years would have been great news for Antiochus III. After all, the ancient world, and even the early modern world, was a dangerous place for a newborn. To take an early modern example, Henry VIII of England had an older brother, Prince Arthur, who died in 1502 to leave Henry as the heir. A bit closer to home from our perspective, Augustus initially placed his hopes of the succession on his nephew Marcellus. Once he died, this hope transferred to his grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar. It was only after they died that Tiberius became heir and ultimately the next emperor. As these examples show, having a backup is a good idea. Certainly the Seleucids could have benefited from a bit of succession stability, given how much chaos the realm had been through in the previous few decades. Next was a child called Ardys, Ardys. I could find nothing about this individual when scrolling through the roll call on Wikipedia. I initially thought this might be a daughter, given that we've seen this kind of name style before, think names like Antiochus. However, Bevan informs me that this is in fact a boy. He thinks it's possible this may in fact be an adoptive son, and that Ardys was, biologically speaking, a maternal nephew of the king. A more modern source is similarly vague about who Ardys exactly is. Whatever the truth really is, Bevan doesn't give me anything about birth order in relation to the other sons. Ardys only gets one mention in Bevan's House of Seleucus Volume 2, and in that capacity we will see him pop up later in the narrative. However, for now, you can just put a big mental question mark next to his name and we'll move on. This same uncertainty goes for a daughter of an unknown name, who we met previously as the betrothed of Demetrius I, king of Bactria, in circa 206 BCE. I'm going to speculate that this daughter may have been called Stratonike. As we'll see, the other royal names are broadly taken, and Stratonike is noticeably absent from the list we've got. However, that's pure speculation. It's with the next royal birth listed on Wikipedia that the fog lifts again. This time, it's a daughter called Laodike, however, we have no birth dates for her either. Getting into her life a little bit, this next bit is the problematic one. Laodike, like her sister, was also married off to her older brother Antiochus. We've seen the Ptolemies do it under Ptolemy IV, but now we have a sibling marriage here too. In fact, the first one of the Seleucid dynasty's entire history. This marriage came in 196 BCE, when Antiochus would have been about 25. A paper we'll get to in a moment gives his bride a birth range between 221 and 219 BCE. If we accept Antiochus was born in the former date and discount anything such as two births in the same year or twins, then Laodike being born in, let's say, 219 BCE would make her about 23 when she married her brother. The two would have one daughter together by the name of Nyssa, born sometime between 196 and 193 BCE. So, here comes the big reveal. Antiochus III has a granddaughter born during his reign. As a point of feedback for the Seleucid house, it would be better if she didn't only have two grandparents, but hey. If memory serves, I think this is the first time actually since Seleucus I that we have grandchildren born to a reigning king. Corrections welcome if this is not the case, but oh how Seleucus II would have longed for this kind of stability. I'm going to leave the rest of Laodike Jr.'s story for now, and instead transition over to Cleopatra, now the wife of Ptolemy V. They would have a total of 3 children together. The first was Ptolemy VI, born in either May or June of 186 BCE. The second was Cleopatra II, born sometime between 186 and 184 BCE. The third was Ptolemy VIII, born in about 184 BCE. And yes, I did say the 8th, not the 7th, I'm sure we'll get to it. Given that 184 BCE is a possible birthday for Cleopatra II and Ptolemy VIII, I'd like to think they were non-identical twins maybe, but it seems unlikely. So it's possible there were 3 children in as many years, all 3 of whom were grandchildren of Antiochus III. Now, we've seen the name Cleopatra before, but it was a Macedonian name rather than anything remotely Seleucid, so let's delve into that a little bit. The reason I bring it up is because there's a possible hypothesis for why this is the case. Alexander the Great, as we've discussed way back during the early episodes, had a sister called Cleopatra, who married Alexander of Epirus. The two would end up having a daughter called Cadmeia, who was supposed to have married, drumroll please, Achaeus the Elder. So there might be a family connection behind the name. Plus, even if there isn't, who doesn't like flouting Macedonian names and precedent in the Hellenistic world? In any case, Antiochus III would not live to see any of these 3 grandchildren being born. However, Cleopatra I might have been pregnant with Ptolemy VI when he died. As their regnal numbers indicate, both sons would become king, and Cleopatra II would be married to both of them. Let's move on. A final daughter listed was Antiochus, namesake of her aunt, and married to Ariarathes IV of Cappadocia. Finally, we get a son called Mithridates, born in 215 BCE. So, that's the roster. I'm sure we'll come back to the lives of all 5 children we know more about, namely Antiochus, Seleucus, Laodike, Cleopatra and Mithridates, in more detail down the line. All told, all of this equates to 8 children. Now, in later centuries, both Agrippina the Elder and Constantina, wife of Emperor Maurice, will be talked of in terms of their fertility for having 9 children. So this record for Laodike III about 2 and 8 centuries earlier is very impressive. All well and good, but what about possible ages, and do we have anything more reliable in terms of source material? Well, there's a 2014 paper which highlights the possible periods when Laodike III and Antiochus III could have conceived children based on the periods they were actually physically together during his rule. The first of these is between the autumn of 222 and 221 BCE, and we've seen this fits quite well with when Antiochus Jr. was born. I won't go into exhaustive detail on this front because that would just be a lot of BCE dates rattled off one after the other, but the long and short of it is that there's opportunities to have children every few years or so, what with all the manic campaigning we've seen our king get up to. The paper uses reasoning I myself would have employed to say that Laodike was the eldest daughter. Namely, she was chosen to marry the heir apparent Antiochus Jr. If you're going to marry any of your daughters to your son, who is the heir apparent to the throne, it seems unlikely that a second daughter would have been considered good enough for this princeling. Added to that, and this is my own reasoning here, the eldest son was named after his father, so it could theoretically follow that the eldest daughter was named for her mother. That said, this is just based on symmetry and satisfaction in a sense, so it's not really scientific reasoning. However, we're not going to stick with the 2014 paper here for Laodike because it opens up a can of worms about whether Laodike really did marry all three of her brothers based on chronology, which I'm not going to get into here. And yes, you heard me right. Consider that a little teaser. Anyway, we know that Princess Cleopatra was older than Prince Mithridates, and Mithridates was the third son, at least out of those surviving. Mithridates is stated to have been between 35 and 40 years old in 175 BCE, which would give him a birth date sometime between 215 and 210. For its part, Wikipedia has 215 as his date of birth. Given that two sources agreeing on something is the best we're going to get, I'm going to establish it as canon for the purpose of this podcast that Mithridates was born sometime then. The paper lists a graph of who we know to be older than whom. For the boys, Antiochus Neos, or New Antiochus, which I think is delightful, is before Seleucus, who is in turn older than Mithridates, while they skip over the question of Ardis entirely. Laodike is older than Cleopatra, and Cleopatra is older than both Antiochus and Mithridates. The paper winds up giving the following chronology, which differs a bit from the one we've arrived at so far. The first child is Antiochus Jr., born in about 220 BCE. Laodike Jr. is born in about 221 to 219 BCE, and as we've seen, this throws the question of when exactly she might have been born up in the air again in a way. Or at least it agrees with the uncertainty that Wikipedia had. Cleopatra is speculated as being the second daughter because she married a foreign king, and is born between 218 and 213. Antiochus then follows sometime between 217 and 210, with Seleucus being born between 219 and 213. Mithridates' birth date is listed between 216 and 210, but as we've seen, we've established it now as being 215 BCE. We then get Nyssa, born between 217 and 210, and possibly nailed down in 211 BCE. Finally, this paper lists a daughter from Antiochus' second marriage born in 191 BCE, which Wikipedia does not agree with. This rounds out the brood, but the paper cautions there may have been up to 3 other children of Laodike and Antiochus. It is also possible that referring to Ardis, he's here again by the way, as a son is mistaken, as Livy, who we get this from, might be confusing a commander of Antiochus' armies of this same name as one of his sons. As you can see, the family life of Antiochus III is a tangled mess. So, I'm going to give a final version that I will be going with here, based on all of the above information, available birth date slots listed in the above mentioned paper, and taking some dates I've been given as either fixed or going for the nearest available alternative. I'm also going to assume, and it might be quite a big assumption, that Ardis is the son of Antiochus and that he was younger than Mithridates, although around about the same age, given that we'll see him and Mithridates mentioned in the same breath in Bevan down the line. The order I'll be going with and the birth date is as follows. Number 1. Antiochus Jr., born 221 BCE. Number 2. Laodike Jr., born 219 BCE. Number 3. Seleucus in 218. Number 4. Cleopatra in 216. 5th. Mithridates in 214. 6th. Ardis in 213. 7th. Nyssa in 211. And finally 8th. Antiochus in 210 BCE. This is entirely arbitrary based on the information we've been given and my own guesswork, and skips the question of any children by a second marriage entirely, but there we go. It's probably the best we're going to get. Next time, we'll get into more detail when it comes to Antiochus Jr., the eldest son of Antiochus III and Laodike III. Once this is done, we'll return back to our main narrative. Until then, thank you all for listening. I hope this tangent was as interesting as it was at times confusing. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for tangent episodes. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.